And welcome to this episode of the Good Citizen Podcast. It's my honor to be here today with Jon Costas, all the way from Valparaiso, Indiana. Jon, thanks for taking some time today to talk to me.
It's great to be here.
And so, Jon, I wanted to talk to you for kind of two big reasons. And one of them is just how can we focus on local issues when there's so much attention being put at the national level? And certainly those issues are important. But in my experience, a lot of transforming our communities to the power of the gospel happens really kind of right down the street. You were a mayor for 16 years. And then another thing I wanted to talk to you about is how can we be gospel-centered citizens in the sense that on one hand, we are citizens of heaven, but we're also citizens of our cities and our nation. You're both a mayor and now a pastor at a church. And so I'm looking forward to kind of hearing how you're able to manage those roles and help us kind of in doing the same. So if you jump right in, tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe 3 to 5 minutes about your time as mayor and how you've kind of transitioned into your church role, and also you serve on the Indiana Commission for Higher Education. So tell us a little bit about that.
Right. So basically, I've done a lot of different things in life. I'm been a small business owner for 40 years. I've been a lawyer, and my father was involved in politics. He was a state senator, and that's how I got involved. I practiced law in Indianapolis, so I was involved politically there with the Republican Party. And when I moved back to Valparaiso with my family, ran for council, and then ran for mayor. Lost the first time, won the second time, and served for 16 years. It was a very transformational time for the city and a very rewarding process for me. I decided not to run for a fifth term because it was a good time for transition. At the same time, I've always, I came to know Christ personally in my senior year of college. So I've always typically been serving in the church in a volunteer capacity, served on a number of elder boards. And so while I was mayor, I was serving on the elder board here at Calvary Church, which is a larger evangelical church here in Valparaiso. And then I chaired that for a while, and then about 5 years ago went back to start get a seminary degree, and still finishing that up because I love God's word, wanted to be prepared for the next adventure in life. Essentially, right now, what I do is I spend about half my time in our small businesses with my son. We have some restaurants and some apartments and stuff like that. I love small business. And then the other half, I'm a volunteer lead pastor, and basically I lead the leadership team because that's where my skill set's at, and love that a lot. So it's really great to be able to do just what you want to do, and I'm enjoying this time of life.
It sounds like you have just way too much free time on your hands.
Well,
Pastor, small business owner, all sorts of things. So that's excellent.
yeah.
So in your bio, you mentioned that your father's, he was a state senator, but that his kind of dramatic spiritual transformation led to your faith journey. Would you share that?
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in an agnostic home, and we were Greek Orthodox, but never really attended church at all. And so my father was small business. He started a supermarket in the Miller section of Gary, and was pretty successful. But had some destructive tendencies in terms of his relationship with my mom, and his life as his success kind of drove that. Sometimes it has that impact. But essentially what happened is one day he showed up, and he had gone away to, I think, a Campus Crusade event in Airhood Springs with some other businessmen. And he came back and said, I found Jesus.
Wow.
He's real. The Bible is truth. And it transformed his life. He became the father. I never really knew that well because he wasn't there in my life. And his passion for the Lord never waned over the years, and he was just very authentic and just loved Jesus, and very outspoken in terms of his faith, and so that genuine experience really impacted me, and along with some other people that came to know Christ that I went to school with in college. Basically, I was lying in my bed one night, my senior year of college, and I said, Jesus is I believe you are who you said you are. It really boils
Mm,
down to that.
mm.
And then I kind of really dug into the Bible and got engaged in church. Met my wife, who was at church, and so that was it's been many years, and I've just tried to grow in grace and knowledge of our Savior, and since then, so that's kind of my journey spiritually.
So you mentioned Valparaiso, and that's where you served as mayor. For somebody that's just driving in their car and doesn't have a chance to kind of look up Valpo on the map, would you describe where Valparaiso is and just a little bit of the demographics of the city?
Sure. So Valparaiso is in northwest Indiana in Porter County. So we're right kind of north. Porter County is the tip of the Lake Michigan. It's a county of about 175,000. Our city is a city of about 35,000. We provide services to about 50,000 in the township. It's a wonderful city of great leadership at all sectors of the of. I talk often about the five pillars of a community, which are business and labor as one, the nonprofit medical community, the education community, the faith community, and the I always miss one when I go through these, but the primary parts of a community, if they're strong, then your community is strong. And I think in Valparaiso, all those sectors are strong. And so I had a lot of work. I had a lot to work with as mayor. There was a strong culture. There was a lot of vibrant leadership, and so, but it was lacking vision and it was lacking culture. And so that was my charge. So I guess what I'd like to do is just touch on, and when I was elected, again, I lost the first time to 20-year incumbent. It was very close. Second time, people finally began to see that, yeah, we're probably not where we need to be. We can be better than we are. And so I ran on vision, and vision can be a little bit scary because you're talking about change. Change is scary, and so the mayor's a change agent in the community. You have to be. You can. I think it was. I don't know if it was Josh McDowell, somebody who said that leadership is the art of managing disappointment, because change creates fear and disappointment, and so you need to know how much you can bring. So, in any event, we did three things that initially. The first was I had to put together a really good team that balanced between continuity and change, which means I had to keep certain people to not lose a lot of technical information about the city. I didn't want to be set back 3 years, but I needed to make key changes so that we could usher in a new culture. And so that's the first thing we did. And we used the book Good to Great. It's one of my favorite business books as a way of bringing this change. So we put this, I think, a great team together. And then the second thing was really about establishing culture and values, even before strategy. So we created our values. I'm a big fan of values because it's the glue that holds a team together, and it really empowers a team and creates accountability. So we created our values, which we had these five: honestly accountable, surprisingly responsive, boldly proactive, creatively frugal, and respectfully compassionate. And those five values were really the glue that held us together and allowed us to, I think, do some really transformative stuff here in Valparaiso. And then the third thing was vision and strategy. I mean, once you have your team, once you have your culture, then it's about where the bus is going, as Jim Collins says. And so really then what we did, we created a citywide effort to get input on where do we go? Where do we drive this bus? It's not just our decision. We really needed to hear from the citizens. So we gave them lots of opportunities to speak into that. And of course, we've updated our plans over the years and always involve the community because you're there to represent them. So with that, we were able to significantly transform the city. Our downtown was dead. Now it is one of the greatest towns of the small city and really the Midwest. And the residential area around the city is exploding, and it's financially stable. It's sustainable. The roads are in good shape. We've rebuilt, not rebuilt, but improved all of our buildings, and we haven't. We've set this up for the next generation, because when we wanted to hand over the city, we wanted it with minimal debt, with a reserve, which we have. We had a fairly large reserve, and we wanted it sustainable, which means we have enough money come in to take care of our roads, pay for our police officers, and to improve our parks. So that's a lot I'm throwing at you, but that's what our goal was, and by God's grace, we were able to really accomplish a lot of that. Sort of surprised ourselves, frankly, along the way, and so it was a very rewarding experience. And when I left, we had a right track. Typically, we would poll is the city on the right track, and we would be between 80 and 85, which is pretty unusual. But it just shows that confirmed that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing at the local level.
So that was a city poll asking the residents if the city was on the right track.
Yeah,
and you got an 80 to 85%.
It was a professional.
It's amazing.
It was a professional poll. Yeah, it is pretty amazing, and it's very consistent. These are likely voters. So that's when you poll likely voters when you do strategy. So there's some scientific polls. They're not just surveys. So we're proud of that. But on the other hand, we say, well, isn't that what we're supposed to do? Now, there's a lot of elements to that. A lot of it was bricks and mortar. A lot of it was planning. And that's the beautiful thing about local government is you really can touch the lives of your citizens. And I think in a lot of ways, it's much more significant than what happens at the state and the federal level. And that's why I liked it so much. That's been my journey, and my predecessor is continuing this work, and I think doing a great job. And it's a very healthy and productive community.
Awesome. And so when you mentioned, you started trying to lead the city towards a new vision, that you ran on vision as a as a candidate. I'm sure many pastors that are listening as they headed into a pastorate could probably certainly they understand that sort of thing. And then I did want to go back for just a second and ask about kind of how you felt God leading you to jump into public life, because a lot of Christians will describe kind of a call into more formal ministry. But how did you discern that call, or was it just hey, I'm interested in this and I want to jump in?
Well, it's, my dad's time, the moral majority effort was underway. This is in the 80s. So I graduated from college in 79 from St. Joseph's College. So the moral majority was big. And it's almost like the churches are going to take back America and fix it. Well, the fact of the matter is this: there's only one person that will fix this world, and that's Jesus Christ. And so, I'm concerned. I was concerned about that message, and feel that, that the churches, to some degree in the 80s, they got very involved again in politics, and that's what got my dad in there, because Christians need to be involved, and we need to change laws, and we need to usher in sort of a new Christendom here through political action. But of course, that's not what Jesus intended. Yet at the same time, it's certainly important for people, for Christians to be engaged and to be involved, but to realize that there's the Christian realm, kingdom, and the temporal kingdom. So what can we do positively in the temporal kingdom, but not confuse the two? So a lot of churches got so involved in political activism and doing good things that they lost sight of the gospel. And the gospel of Jesus Christ is the only thing that can truly transform people, and I believe to some degree communities too. So that's kind of what was my background, and I was a little skeptical of that by the time I got involved. And I just felt, that there's a need for good leadership. That I can make a difference. Leadership is something that I read a lot about, and I'm always learning. And a lot of times people get elected and they're just not really good leaders, and everybody suffers. So that I felt that was part of my giftedness, and so that's why I got involved.
You mentioned something that
Yeah.
I was thinking about the day that I wanted to just mention when Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, and I'm sorry, I was just studying this, so it's just interesting that you brought it up. When Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, visits him, and Moses, he's like most of us these days. He's completely overburdened, stressed out, like, because he's trying to judge everybody's disputes and all that. And Jethro says, "Hey, you need to go find some people and appoint them to help you with this." And he mentions four qualifications, but the first one he mentions is not one that we talk a lot about in Christian circles. He says they should be able, they should be competent in their job. And that's something I appreciate, just that you mentioned, that if you're going to go into the space, you had gone to law school, you had studied these things, and you were ready to go and competent at your work of being a public official. So you just mentioned that. I was studying that just right before I hopped on. I thought that was an important point. So when you became mayor, you mentioned some of the economic issues facing the city. Were there other issues, maybe social issues? Maybe that would be poverty, foster care, something along those lines that was also facing the city that you had to address?
Well, we're fortunate to have a very strong nonprofit sector. And so we've got lots of healthy organizations, well funded, providing services. But I think the thing that Christians who are elected officials, they have to understand they are elected to serve every citizen and voter. And a lot of those citizen voters do not believe like you believe. But that's okay, because this is not church. Okay, church is church, and serving people as an elected official is about serving what they want. So oftentimes you have people that might come to you, and there's issues, of human rights ordinance we had this issue come up, and a lot of people felt strongly that we want to give certain protections with regard to gender and sexuality. Personally, I believe in the Bible's and what it reveals about the truth about sexuality and gender. But I'm representing all these people, and my job is to help bring peace and understanding in a community. So rather than just pass something in the middle of the night and be done with it, we had a lot of public conversations. It was very interesting. People were talking in the same room who came from different universes, but it was really good. And I've always said a good process yields a good result. The process is often as much important as the result. And so when we deal with hard issues, we don't just sort of have a discussion among city council and pass the law. We have these discussions leading up to it, because sometimes that's what's really needed. So you just have to realize that, that you're serving people who may not agree with you on issues, and you've got to find your way with that, and not to confuse it, and realize I have my beliefs, and a lot of people may not believe the way that I believe, and we got to find a way to work together and get things done. But the great thing about local government, a lot of this is practical. Now, in dealing with the differences of opinions, it's really important to open your office, and that means giving a voice to those who maybe have been shut out before because of their politics or because of their certain beliefs or values. And so I went out of my way to really try to engage with those people and make them feel they're welcome at City Hall, and pointing the people of goodwill to boards. We appointed first people of color to boards. We hired a first person of color for police officers. So the mayor does empower people, and we wanted to empower people who may think differently than us, but are people of goodwill and doing good work in the community. And it worked pretty well. So I had a lot of support among Democrats as well as Republicans, because they felt they had my ear. They had access to City Hall. And so the mayor is the one who also empowers others and can create and can build these bridges that create trust in a community so that you can get things done. The more trust I had, the more I could push the envelope and do the things that needed to be done to strengthen the city. And so they're connected in that way.
You mentioned something that I think is really important. We talk a lot about civility these days and the lack of it. However, we we complain about it, but we don't go out and try to practice anything differently. And so I love that even on such a contentious issue, LGBTQ rights, just recognizing that we need to have an actual civil conversation about these things that we disagree on, rather than taking a view of, I'm just going to kind of cram down what I believe. I'm still going to promote what is true, right, and beautiful, but I'm going to do so in such a way that I build relationships with other people. I think that's a really important skill for any Christian that's engaged in public life.
Absolutely. Everyone is made in the image of God. And the Bible's clear. We're not here to judge. God has spoken his truth, and we believe that truth, but we're to love and respect every person. And that means hearing them and allowing them to express themselves and trying to build bridges. Because in a lot of ways, we may agree on 90% of stuff. We may agree that it's important to have a safe community, it's important to have good education, it's important to be good parents, all those things. We never seem to talk about all things we agree with. We seem to focus on the few things we disagree with. So I'm always trying to find points of contact of agreement. And when that happens, people feel at peace. They feel good about their government, and they support your efforts to push the envelope. I mean, we did a lot of things like created transportation systems. We have 6 buses going into Chicago. Some really unique things. We created a bus system, an inner city bus system that really helps our low income people. We encouraged private sector to build a lot of transitional housing. So the thing is you can't do that unless there's a strong sense of trust in community. And to do that, you've got to build those bridges. And I think it works when you do.
So true. So it sounds like you built a very strong partnership in between your office and the faith community. How did that happen? Was that pastors coming to you, or did you actually go out and kind of initiate some of that contact?
Well, first of all, as a mayor who understands, who's part of a church, you begin to see that the faith community is a huge part of the health of the community. We have a really strong faith community here, and so I just valued the fact that we had a strong faith community because I knew it was make my job easier in a lot of ways. So it starts with valuing that sector of the community and then empowering them. So if a new pastor or priest comes into town or a faith leader, I meet them. I invite them in and we talk and we establish this relationship. And I said, if you need to call me anytime, call me. Okay. And that happens. So again, I'm going out of my way to make sure that they feel they have this connection to City Hall because they are two very different worlds. It's funny. Recently, we had a big meeting in the Chamber of Commerce where they make awards for new buildings. And we had 2 tables from church, and then the rest was the chamber. And so this was my world. I've been to these a million times, but it's funny how our pastors and key leaders who were there, it was that's not their world. And so it's, as Jerry Seinfeld, to me, it was worlds colliding. But I'd like to see more of that, and so trying to make that happen and I would point pastors to boards quite a bit, because they're community leaders too. So that helps them engage in the community, whether it be a human relations commission that we created, or the BZA or something. So trying to engage church leaders in active involvement.
I love your example in that regard. And of course, right now we're going through some of the tail end of the COVID-19 shutdowns. And there are these issues across the country where, church and the state are kind of at each other. And that happens sometimes. But what I'd love to pursue is if, state's doing its biblical role of kind of restraining evil, promoting good. The church is doing its biblical role of fulfilling the Great Commission. Those 2 entities should be partners rather than opponents. And I love that you actually went out of your way to say, hey, this is one of the 5 key areas of our community. And so we need to strengthen those relationships. And I love the vision that you cast there too. There's so many times I've been at city events, and every other key community player is there, but the church is not. And then the church wonders, like, well, why does anybody listen to us? Why does anybody care? Well, and I think a lot of pastors are doing a great job of this, or they're beginning to do so. But just want to encourage them on the podcast to go to those chamber events, get involved in the life of the city. I love that vision. So as we kind of come down to the end of our interview today, do you have some examples of maybe how you worked together with pastors there in Valpo? And I love the kind of bus example. Any other innovative ways that you served alongside the faith community?
Well, the faith community and a lot of our nonprofits work seamlessly, and so just encouraging that engagement is good. When we worked with the pastors, when we had the human rights, the local human rights ordinance, we engaged pastors in that. So it's just a matter of trying to do it in whatever opportunities that you have. So, and getting and trying to encourage a spirit of collaboration among the nonprofits, in the medical community and the business community and the education community, and help everybody to see, we need each other. Okay, we are our brother's keeper, and we need to do what we do well, but also respect what the other sectors are doing and doing it well, and realize that it's not us or them, it's us. And so just trying to create that culture where we can celebrate that is an ongoing thing that I think a local elected official need to do, because we all know that national politics is incredibly divisive, and what the political pundits do is they divide in order to win, and they just try to slice it right down 51%. So that's the tactics. And I remember working for Mike Pence when I was a lawyer in Indianapolis, and he finally came to the conclusion that I'm done with negative campaigning because I can't do it well, and it hurts people. Although, so he did away with it. It's harder to win with a positive voice. But when you do, see, if you go negative, what happens is you divide people, and then you can't get anything done when you're elected.
Yeah.
If you're patient and you stay positive, and it took us 2 times to win, but we stayed with this positive message. Here's what I'll do. Here's what I'll do. Here's what needs to be done. Not my opponent, is faltering and calling him names and whatnot. The thing about doing it that way is when I was elected, I didn't have a lot of upset people because I didn't go negative against my opponent. He was loved by the community. So I was able to get a lot done because I didn't have. So that's the problem with negative campaigning. It divides, and then you get nothing done, and the people suffer. So we got to deal with that.
Well, you talked about values towards the beginning of this podcast, and just so everyone knows, it's not like we didn't rehearse this interview, but you've just hit on so many of the values of what we're trying to accomplish with the podcast, with the Daniel Initiative in the state of Indiana, kind of the Good Citizen Project around the country. And one of those is what you just said. It's easy to make a statement, but as Christians, we're called to make a difference. And it's hard. It doesn't get the clicks and likes sometimes. You got to run twice. But if you really want to transform a community and reflect Christ in your citizenship, as we're commanded in Philippians 1:27, that's the way to do it. So I'm just so thankful for your example in that regard. Yeah, you mentioned that you were both a mayor and now actually on staff at a church. Mm-hmm. So again, as we head into this 2020 election season, I'm not asking for you to say, hey, vote for this person, vote against that person, but just in kind of a general concept, having to kind of navigate both of those roles. You did it very well as a mayor. Now you're on kind of the other side of it as a pastor. Do you have any advice for pastors and Christians as they try to do that well in the coming months?
Yeah, I would say this, and we're dealing with this, the churches need to realize what they're called to do. They're called to proclaim Christ and make disciples. There's a lot of other things they can do that seem to be good things to do and are good things to do. But ultimately, they have to be very careful and staying away from this whole political divide and focus on the gospel of Jesus Christ. And John 6:63 says, It's the Spirit that gives life. The flesh is no help at all. So the church has to stay away from um, man-made efforts to do the work that Jesus called us to do. That can only be done through following the Spirit and focusing on the gospel, the good news, the message of Christ coming to save lost sinners, and not argue over which sin is worse. We're all in the same boat in a sense. And the question is, do we realize we need a Savior? And if so, then what a beautiful story for God to leave his earthly kingdom, come down here, be humiliated and beaten to pay our penalty. It's the most wonderful story in the world. And the more you dig into it, the bigger it gets. So that's what the churches need to be focusing on.
It's helpful. And so, John, any recent kind of meaningful moments or God moments where you felt like God was working through you, either in your role in public life or at the church?
Yeah. So recently, we have a fairly large church, and we had a pastor, a very charismatic pastor that was there 20 years. The church had grown a lot, and we were in the middle of an $8 million campaign when he left abruptly and created a great vacuum. Yeah. Well, but we learned that Jesus is the leader of the church, and he'll provide everything you need. And so it was a tremendous learning opportunity for me to see a new culture emerge, but a new dependence upon the Holy Spirit, because church is different than a business or a nonprofit. It has a spiritual leader. It is countercultural, and essentially, what I found out more than anything is if we just ask God to show us the way, even though we don't know the way, he is faithful to do that. So we learned a lot. We made a lot of changes in our Constitution that would encourage that, and that needed to be made. And the church is stronger than ever. But it's not. We brought our skills and talents, but really we see God's hand in everything. And what a beautiful thing to say, look what's happened, and God did it. And he used us along the way. That's very cool. So that's been quite a learning experience for me, because I was chairman of the elder board at that time and had to navigate that, and to see where we've emerged today is just really a great thing.
That's awesome. So if I'm worrying about a bigger problem later on, I'll just think about your $8 million problem. And so,
yeah, and that all worked. Yeah, it all worked out well. We're done with it. We
awesome.
Ended up on budget, and people were very gracious. So, it's a God thing. So,
sure. Well, if you had a billboard on which you could put a message to the broader gospel preaching church, what would you put on it?
It would just be the gospel. I mean, we have to remember that and this is why, in Scripture, Paul says that, hey, some are preaching Christ out of envy. They want to make more difficult for me. Some are preaching Christ from right motives, but what matters is Christ is preached. And what he's saying is that the gospel is inherently powerful. And so we don't have to think we have to convince everybody how cool Jesus is or how great the gospel is. We just need to tell his story, and authentically and in humility. And the story is inherently powerful. People are waiting to hear that. And so the churches, if we want to transform society, let's be engaged individually. Let's speak let's not carry a banner politically, but let's make sure that we are really focused on the best thing, which is the gospel. And the churches, really, that's all they have to offer is the gospel. If not, we're just a Rotary Club, Sure. So stay focused on the gospel. It's a story that only gets better the more you hear it. So.
Amen. That's a good word, especially now in 2020 as we head into election season. Well, John, I just want to thank you for your example of engaging in public life, doing the hard work of Christian citizenship, but remaining focused on the gospel. That's what we aspire to do. And I'm just so thankful for your very practical example of that. So thanks for taking some time today to talk with us.
You're welcome. It's great to be with you, Josh.